Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the COVID-19 Preparedness webinar series by the Max Institute of Healthcare Management at the Indian School of Business. I am Sowmya Shashidhara, the Associate Director at the Institute and the host of the series. In our earlier webinars, we have talked about ICU preparedness, role of home care, teleconsulting as an idea whose time has finally come given the unprecedented conditions the pandemic has presented. Today, we'll be talking about healthcare innovation in times of crisis. The complexity and urgency of COVID-19 has given rise to a multitude of problems that need solutions. In this webinar, we will talk about what it takes to innovate in healthcare, that too in times of crisis. To discuss, to discuss this, we have two panelists who are living, thinking, and most importantly, solving the problems associated with innovating. First, we have Ajit Rangnekar, Director General of Research and Innovation Circle of Hyderabad, a Telangana government initiative to take innovation in agriculture, health, and sustainability to market. Ajit is currently heading an expert committee that is evaluating COVID-19 related innovations that can be implemented in response to the pandemic. Ajit is no stranger to ISB. He is the former dean of the school and one of our own. Ajit, thank you for being here with us. Next, we have Next, we have Professor Prashant Jha, Head of Affordable Medical Technologies Division and Professor of Innovation at King's College London. Prashant is a physician, engineer, and an inventor all rolled into one. He's also a visiting faculty at Indian School of Business and teaches two courses at ISB's Advanced Management Program for Healthcare. One on MedTech for delivery business for our mid-career participants from healthcare delivery space to understand the nuances of MedTech from the boundary of healthcare delivery. And he also teaches a course on patient centricity and is actively developing an India-centric patient centricity framework as part of the course. Prashant is working in COVID-19 frontline as an intensivist and has just gotten off a night shift to be here with us. So a very special thanks to you for making this effort, Prashant, and welcome to the webinar. I will,
Yes, Tom.
I will begin the discussion by asking a few questions to the panelists, and after that, we will take questions from the participants. I would like to start the discussion with Prashant. Prashant, I would like to just ask you to set the stage for the discussion by talking about the innovation process that is involved in healthcare and what it takes to innovate to respond to a crisis like the one we are in.
Thank you, Sowmya. Thank you for the opportunity. That's a very nice question. And if I have to set the framework on how innovations usually happen, usually they start with an insight that could be either serendipitous or it could be actively pursuing uh, creation of new stuff. So you either suddenly have aha moment, a light bulb moment, which is usually how the world thinks it happens, or quite unlike that, in reality, it is an active pursuit of I need to create something, and then you figure that out. And from there, you walk through a journey of validating it, going it for understanding its utility, acceptability, safety out there in the real world, trialing, failing, improving before you roll it out to the real people. So if I have to put it, I usually like to use an acronym for it. I call it the 5D process, which is you discover a problem, first D, then you define your constraints, second D, third D is you design a context specific solution, the fourth D is you develop a product, a service, or a solution. And finally, the last D is when you deploy it in the wild, in the public. So that's the framework that I use to describe it. And if I have to say what has happened in this crisis, I think in this crisis we have had to short circuit a lot of things. We actually knew what we needed, hopefully, and we will talk about it later. And we have jumped through a lot of hoops very quickly. So something that would have taken, for example, months for regulators, even in India, say, for example, CDSCO takes 6 months to 1 year to think about something. MHRA in the UK takes a few months to a few years, or FDA in the US takes a few years to say, okay, we think it is okay. All of them have said, okay, we'll make an exception and you can jump straight away from design to deployment with as limited feasibility testing as possible as an exception. So everyone has taken up to the challenge. Regulators have been particularly very fast, and they have approved a lot of things in record time.
Getting out the mute there. So you have your you're part of the frontline at NHS, and then you closely work with the healthcare ecosystem. And I just want you to talk about, from your understanding, what are the types of innovations or requirement that is being thrown up as part of the pandemic that probably the Indian healthcare system or even more evolved healthcare systems had not anticipated.
So I think if you look at where the solutions are needed or where innovations are needed, it would be very simplistic of me to classify it, but still, for ease of understanding, I'll try. And if you look at it, the solutions are needed at three stages, for three groups of populations or three groups of users. One is at the population level, the second is at the provider level, and the third is at the patients level. So I like making acronyms, so three Ps, so population, provider, and patients. If you look at the population level, there are, of course, healthcare innovations, and this is what we are talking about. So in terms of healthcare innovations, any country, any decently large country, and I'm not talking of city countries, but countries or large countries with large populations, it's a big challenge to do contact tracing. It's a very, very big challenge to do testing or symptom reporting. And these have been amenable to digital solutions. And if you have looked at the joint venture of Google and Apple to come up with an API, Government of India has come up with an Arogya Setu app. In UK, they have come up with NHS X has come up with an app. Singapore, South Korea, China, of course, we know very little about what happened there, but from the surface of it, they also did an app which created a sort of passport that, okay, you have recovered and you can go out. So digital health solutions, again, for the general public, as you rightly said, at times crisis can change societies, and crisis can precipitate new ways of doing things. So I like to say this, that demonetization made money digital, and coronavirus has made health digital. So people had so much resistance to talk to a doctor on FaceTime or Skype or similar tools, and now that has become so commonplace. So there's no going back from here, I believe. That's one. At the provider level, I think there are three specific things, and they're all much in demand and unfortunately not available as much as they should be. So one is personal protective equipment. You cannot risk the limited number of providers that you have when they are dealing with patients to get infected themselves, which is happening a lot everywhere in the world. So personal protective equipment is one. The second is the access to diagnostic tools that they would want, number two. And the third is innovations in terms of understanding the disease. As of now, every day I read conflicting reports about, is ventilator useful? Is it not useful? Is it actually saving life? In the beginning, it was considered a panacea that you have enough ventilators and you will save everyone. And that didn't turn out to be true. Then there have been reports about that, well, is this causing oxygen starvation rather than difficulty breathing? And still we don't know. So the third bit of innovation in terms of understanding of the disease process, which is still evolving. Finally, if you come down to the third P in terms of innovations required there, of course, is life-sustaining equipment. And at times it is not just a new equipment that is needed, but at times, and in these times specifically, we do not need something new. We probably need to have new ways of doing things that we were already doing. So ventilator is not a new invention. And again, I'm talking of ventilators because I'm involved in two ventilator projects. One is at the frontline effort of NHS to develop, there was a call for ventilators, and my colleagues and I worked for a while to build Oxvent, which is the Oxford King's joint venture to build a ventilator, still a work in progress. And another one was in India to build a $100 ventilator, which is a modification of a pre-existing ventilator in Pune with my colleagues at ICER Pune. And here again, we were looking at new ways of providing life-saving equipment, in particular, starting from as basic as providing oxygen, which appears, we assume it is by default available everywhere. It is not. By providing ICU beds, by providing segregation, segmentation, and isolation within very congested wards in India. Life-saving equipment like dialysis equipment, their filters and ventilators, and finally some sort of therapy. And I think, as everyone knows, we don't yet have an answer. Is plasma therapy the answer? We don't know. Is chloroquine the answer? Most likely not, but still we don't know. Do we have any specific antiviral for it? We don't know. So drug diagnostics and equipments which are life-saving are for the third P, which is patients. I hope so at population, for providers, and for patients.
Great, Prashant. That's a good way of like classifying things. Now I want to come to Ajit, because Ajit, on a daily basis, you are speaking to innovators. You are trying to see what are the innovations that are coming up, and is it really responding to the specific needs that we have, as which can in turn respond to the crisis. So, can you just take us through what's happening in India at the innovation ecosystem? What are the kind of solutions that are being proposed at this point?
Thank you, Sowmya. Always good to be back at ISB, even if it's not in person. See, I'll just take further from what Prashant said. The first category is apps. And we've seen a large number of apps, whether it's for prevention, monitoring, answering people's queries. Please understand, I mean, there are people living in rural India who don't necessarily have as much access to information as we in urban India have. So IVR is becoming a huge, big tool for most state governments to actually, and in local languages to answer, and that's becoming a big thing. Screening, even for health authorities to manage, where are the hotspots happening, where is the patients coming from, all those. And of course, as Prashant again mentioned, telemedicine is coming very strongly to the fore. One more area in which we are also beginning to see a large number of apps developing quickly is mental health. As people are under enormous stress, here is something that nobody knows anything about. What has happened, what will happen, what is happening, how do I do? Nothing. So that's created a lot of stress on all. So mental health is becoming. So there is a large number of apps. And one of the big things now is also putting all those apps together into a single, which is big. So that is one big thing that is happening. Testing kits is another. I mean, in 1 month or thereabouts, I'm incredibly impressed by the number of approved testing kits that have come. At least 5 to 6 testing kits have been improved. All RT-PCR. We have not seen any antibody tests at least approved. Some of the IITs are talking about it, but those have not been approved. At least 4 to 5, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 6, including some from Hyderabad, many from Pune, Ahmedabad. These are the natural centers. These have been the healthcare centers, and therefore you would expect that to happen. A large number of startups are trying to use AI/ML for testing purposes. But the problem here is we simply don't have enough data to give them for them to build their. So none of them have really, whether it's X-ray, whether it is cough, etc. But people are trying a whole lot of things. Then other thing which I'm delighted has actually already started and is working is test collection infrastructure. I can have all the tests, but if the tests are being conducted somewhere in some villages, how the hell do we bring them out? How do we test them, check them? So companies like Molbio, I always call them Moblio. Molbio have created vans which can go and do it. So people are doing some really good things. The next category is obviously PPEs. And this is where honestly I have a lot of worry. Because all kinds and manners of people who are predominantly garment manufacturers and others have got into the PPE scene. And already doctors have been complaining about the poor quality of PPEs, not suitable for Indian environments, etc., etc. People are talking again about all kinds and manners of face shields and protective equipments. There is a lot of supply, but the quality of it needs to be looked at. ICU augmentation again, ventilators or ensuring greater efficiency of ventilators through splitters, etc. Online control of all of that. Again, we don't know whether they're going to be required, but a large number of aerospace companies and aerospace startups have very quickly moved in. Interestingly, another two these things we've seen a lot of is one, for a while we saw a sudden spike in disinfection chambers, so that when you enter any office premises or something, you are supposed to get disinfected. The theory behind it was highly suspect, and at least now many of the states have banned that. So hopefully that's not. But there is a potential market for PPE disinfection, because we may not be able to throw away all our PPEs. We may have to reuse a lot of PPEs, in which case their sanitization becomes a huge big challenge. And there is some work happening. There are few companies which are testing it. The last category, which is fine, but again, which does not necessarily seem to be supported by rigorous science, is nutrition and immunity building. So a whole lot of things for people to eat, for people to drink, for people to, so things which people are, that has been, health, those have been. Two categories which we have interestingly not seen, at least I have not seen, and maybe if somebody in the audience can tell me about it. One is there is no hair care, home care equipment. We are going to need, if this thing really goes the way it has been in other countries, how do we, the Israelis have done some really amazing things in space, where you use telemedicine with home care equipment which you can actually use. So that we have not seen in India. And when it comes to vaccines, we have not seen the startup ecosystem. We have seen a large number. There are at least 6 startups, including 3 from Hyderabad, Bharat Bio, Indian Immunological and Biologically, and of course recently Serum Institute has been talking about their association with. So that's a broad listing of what has been happening in India.
So, Ajit, I think there's definitely a lot of energy, which is, I think, absolutely fantastic and required. And then very heartening to see that everybody is like kind of rising up to the occasion to kind of wanting to contribute and then help. So, so what is the readiness of this whole thing? And if we do really want to capture these ideas and then bring it to kind of like a state where will be able to kind of implement it and then really make use of the benefits. So what will that take, and then what are the challenges that you're seeing, and then are there any innovations that you've already seen which are being implemented, given that they have been very close to what they're supposed to be doing and what is required?
I'll start with your last one. There are, as I said, these 5 to 6 testing kits have already been approved and are under production. And I think in a matter of few days they'll come in. But I'll qualify even that. Lots of apps are already in use. Okay. The ICU augmentation of ventilators actually is in some cases being used. But let me come back to your first question. See, what is happening is many people are coming from the technology side. And technology is either an app or a biochemist, bio scientist, etc. And at least the techies do not understand the requirements of the healthcare industry. An app can fail, an app can work sometimes, and you say, okay, I'll come out with version 2. You dare not do that with human beings, right? So we find that as one big gap, and some of us have been therefore spending a lot of time trying to bring these different people together and make them explain, for example. So one of the things that we started with a company called Zintio Scient in Hyderabad, and we started test beds, where techies can talk to doctors, we can understand what some of the requirements are, so that you make it to the kind of rigor that is required. So that is one big problem. The other challenges that startups have is scaling and quality. We are saying that we have approved 6 kits. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they'll be able to manufacture to the same quality as the approved kits They'll be able to distribute it. They'll be able to make sure that they're sent to wherever they have been sent, that whoever tests it will be able to use it and to come to rightful conclusions from it. We are all, as Prashant rightly said, the whole approval process has been fast-tracked so much that we are taking a lot of risk with many of these things. Then the AI/ML startups, as I said, there are people working with X-rays, there are people working with coughs, there are people working with cameras. But where is the data? Unless I get a large number of samples of COVID plus patients, I'm not going to be, and the public hospitals are simply not in a position to provide some of that. Right? Interestingly, there are 3-4 things which are going very well. ACT, Action COVID team created that 100 crore grant. It is not even a loan or an investment, it's a grant. And many of these startups have benefited from it for scaling up. That's a great big thing. So at least immediate funding is available. Longer term may still be, but at least for the moment it's fine. The other big thing which I think has taken all of us by a very pleasant surprise is the regulatory speed of regulatory approval is incredible. One people whom we cannot complain about is the rate at which the regulator is approving. Now, what risk they are taking, as I said, and Prashant mentioned this, I also worry about it, but they're doing it. The second thing is that all the state governments, or at least many of them that we know, have changed their procurement processes to quickly take on board and order. So those are some good things that are happening, but there are still many. Ultimately bringing everything together, the supply chain aspects of it, the links, those are things we still have to think about. But I have to say, in a month or less than 2 months, this is incredible.
That's very heartening, Ajit. So I'll go back to Prashant at this point. Prashant, you're in the front line responding to this pandemic. Also, in a place where probably the response was needed and started much ahead of where India is at this point. And then from your observation, are there any lessons that can be learned from your ecosystem to for India as we go ahead in our fight against this pandemic?
I mean, keeping my biases aside, as an Indophile, I'm an India lover. So even if I keep that aside, I think UK can learn a lot from India in terms of how systematic and how nicely and how in a disciplined way they have implemented the lockdown. That is quite a lesson to learn, because people think that a country which is not as literate, but I believe literacy has very little connection to wisdom. But I believe India is a very wise country. It cannot have the 3 R's of literacy. It has actually implemented the lockdown very well. I personally believe that we should test, and do more tests, which we're not doing. So we don't know actual numbers. But keeping that aside, lockdown has been phenomenal. I was very glad to see how, except a few incidences, the political differences has been set aside, and like people who would always swear at each other have come together and praised and collaborated. That's something which UK can probably learn, to not shut down dissent, but put your differences aside for a moment and work together. What India can learn from UK very clearly, I believe, is, I think there is one thing about India which has come out again and again when I looked at it, and I did approach a few teams, and I was approached by quite a few teams, that everyone is trying to do the same thing. So, for example, what I really liked about UK was they accepted that yes, we have very limited supply of ventilators, and the whole Ministry of Health, the regulator, and industry bodies came together, created a joint framework which they revised. So they knew that the version 1 which MHRA released for specifications of an emergency ventilator was changing. So it changed very rapidly into probably version 2, version 3, and version 3.1, which I would like to call version 4. Unlike that, if you look at in India, what happened was it was, of course, a very heartwarming thing to look at. But if you look at the larger context, there are too many people trying to do the same thing. If it was all coordinated, this is not the time to reinvent the wheel. If you look at just ventilators, I have created a new acronym. I call it ambubag compression devices, ABCDs. Everyone is trying to create, okay, here is an ambubag, I'll press it like this. Someone is pressing it like this. Someone is pressing it both ways. Good. But do you really need to do that? You work together, come up with one model and scale. You do not compete with components that go into existing ventilators and come up with something. There is no patent involved, and all of us are trying to help. So, probably what I believe is a bit amiss is one central nodal coordination agency which brings together the collective efforts and the collective desire to help and channelizes it into something bigger and faster. It will just be a bigger collective vector if it is not scattered. So I think, of course, there is both things to learn, and there is something I also want to talk about because it popped up in one of the questions here, and I want to make a point. Somebody just put in here, well, NHS is UK is a rich country, and does NHS actually need uh, affordable innovations? So here I will take a stab, and there is something which is very important. I was at the WHO meet on healthcare technologies. I'm there every few years. And I actually asked this question to a room full of people where more than 100 countries were represented. I asked them a question, raise your hand if you come from a country that has enough resources to deal with your healthcare problems, irrespective of whether you come from the developed part of the world, developing, underdeveloped, or still unclassified. Nobody raised their hands. So healthcare affordability is pretty universal, and it applies to India, it applies to UK, it applies to whole world. We don't have enough money to deal with the healthcare problems.
Great. So that talking about the larger ecosystem and things, that comes to my last question to Ajit. And before that, I want to invite participants to put in your questions in the Q&A section. We will try and take as many questions as possible, and then I will kind of scroll down and try and summarize 2-3 questions so that we can, kind of do more in less, which seems to be the theme around during the time of lockdown and everything. So coming to my last questions to the panel, I would like to direct this to Ajit. So considering quick turnarounds and then need for a multidisciplinary approach that is needed for healthcare innovation, so I think how do we create a larger ecosystem that can nurture sustained innovation? I think that is what is coming through both of your conversations, right? It is good to look for something that is needed now, but I think we need to have like a system that is very flexible and in place so that we can kind of jumpstart a lot of aspects of the healthcare innovation aspect. So Ajit, we would like to hear your views about
So I think inevitably I'm going to make a 30-second commercial for 3 years ago we started the Research and Innovation Circle of Hyderabad. With what purpose? Exactly this objective, right? But the truth is, looking back, we were simply not wise enough to think of these kind of people. We were still talking about the diseases we knew, that how do we all together manage something like some different cancers, how do we manage TB, how do we manufacture diabetes and things like that, how do we manage all these things, how do we bring techies, how do we bring healthcare professionals, how do we bring scientists, hospitals, everything. And that's what we started. But I think we'll have to create a version 2.0. We'll have to completely, almost 90%, just keep the idea that we need to bring everyone, but completely rethink the way we will have to do this. So that's number one. Number two, as I already mentioned, we are doing something very specific like test beds. The other thing which India lacks enormously, and I'm a big fan of the UK Biobank, big fan. India needs a national biobank. We are all saying, why is it that it doesn't affect us the same way? Well, where is our genetic data for us to do anything about? So we need to create, with all this COVID, if we can get data of all of this, can we keep a whole lot of things, see how it interacts with various genetic? So we desperately need a national biobank. interesting thing is that at the government level, TST, DBT, and especially BIRAC is doing a phenomenal case in encouraging startups. But after that, there is a big valley of death when these startups die because of lack of funding from private sector. And that private sector funding to a great extent does not come because they perceive that the time required to take a product to industry and to commercialize it is very long because of the uncertainty about regulation. So now is a chance for us to not exactly take the current regulatory speed, but come to something in between where we can assure any startup that in a matter of 6 months or something, if you come up to us with this kind of thing, we'll give you a regulatory approval or we'll deny it. If we can get private sector funding and that regulatory clarity, the rest of the things we have to, now we don't have to sell. When we started the Research and Innovation Circle 3 years ago, we had to bash our heads against everyone, research institutions, academic institutions, researchers, entrepreneurs, everyone. Why do we have to collaborate with us? Who are these? They don't understand us. Now all that has been solved. Our case is clear. How soon and how quickly we move across each, and where I slightly differ with Prashant is, India is such a large country that everything cannot be done on one national scale. We will have a large number of pockets where, whether we like it or not, we in Telangana will compete with Karnataka, Karnataka and us will compete with Maharashtra and with Gujarat. And that's good because through that competition, we try and do better than each other. So at least can we collaborate? By the way, the principal scientific advisor to the government has already started city clusters where we have begun to collaborate with each other. Again, it started just before COVID and it had nothing to do with COVID. But very interestingly, it was done to solve big national societal problems. So somebody, Vijay Raghavan or whoever, had some thought somewhere. So we have many things in place. The last thing we need is capable young people to come and join us. People are doing startups, but if somebody has to also come into that support infrastructure, because we are finding it impossible to get. So I'll stop there.
For this webinar is that it's going to be interactive, so I'm going to take a few questions.
I think Prashant wanted to respond to that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, go ahead, Prashant.
Just a one-liner response. I think I completely agree with whatever Ajit has said. In addition, I think it is important that the way a country, and if we are talking of India or we are talking of any other country, the way they look at self-reliance or reliance on absolutely stable partners when it comes to arms and ammunition. Similarly, we should start looking at healthcare and its tools and technologies as super essential. We cannot rely on just in time, just one place and economics of scale when it comes to manufacturing. We cannot rely on one place to manufacture it all. I think we need to look at it, and if there is any time to look at bolstering efforts on Make in India, especially for healthcare, I think it is now.
I think the complexity also arises from the fact that we thought we had left infectious disease way back many decades ago, and then now we have moved on to the NCDs, and then now I think this is a great looking back and learning and going forward. So I'll just come to some of the questions here. One about healthcare innovations are usually expensive, but in terms of money and time, reaching to the last infected human at the farthest of border is a big challenge. How can we deal with this basic need through innovation? Prashant, would you take that, considering you're building setup collaborative focused on affordable medical technologies?
I think I wish there was a clear answer, and I think there are three aspects to it. One is healthcare spending, and clearly all governments have to spend more on healthcare, especially India has to spend more on healthcare. Number two is resolve and refer. we need to rely, and probably this is the time that we need to rethink what the Bhore Committee report did to India when the Indian healthcare whole system was being envisioned. We have never realized its true goal in the sense of a primary, secondary, tertiary, where people are referred and resolved, and that reduces the burden on our tertiary centers. Even in this pandemic, if you look, everyone looks at going straight away to a tertiary center because that's what we are all attuned to, those who can afford it. But majority of the cases can actually be resolved with a teleconsultation. They can be resolved with self-isolation, and they will heal. And that's a silver lining. So improving upon our primary, secondary, tertiary, and a thorough referral and resolve system, which is number two, R&R, as they say it. And the number one was more investments coming from the healthcare. And number three, I think, would be to reduce inequality between healthcare practices in different states. Well, this is one of my questions which I don't have an answer to. We all pay the same rate of taxes, and why is that somebody in Bihar should have poorer access to healthcare quality than in Kerala? And probably because there has been so much coordination now, and despite healthcare being a state subject, I believe there is time now to really rethink about common service quality index comparisons that the government does, not judgments, but comparisons for improvement. Something which a lot of Western European countries and UK does, is where everyone does an audit. Again, it should not become an administrative or bureaucratic thing, but something for self-improvement. So these three things.
So, Sowmya, just to add to that, here in this part of the world, and you're right, Prashant. I mean, somehow south of Vindhyas, the healthcare is a lot more evolved than it is sadly up north. LV Prasad Eye Institute has actually demonstrated for the last 30 years that this tertiary care, in fact, they now talk of quarter. So they have created tertiary cares in three this thing, and at fourth level at the top in Hyderabad. So it is eminently doable. There are practices every day, and they are happy to put anything and everything you want in public domain. Right? The other thing, when it comes to equipment, etc., just look at what we did with telecom. I used to be a telecom consultant in my previous life in Hong Kong. And we used to say that unless you get an ARPU of $100, don't get into this practice. In India, you could do it with 100 rupees. Right? Because we managed to systematically, we are outstanding at reducing the cost, indigenizing things and reducing the cost. What we have to do is to do it without reducing the quality.
Yeah.
And I think it's eminently possible if we bring the engineers, the doctors, the other healthcare and say, hey, look, solve this problem, but if it costs $1,000, do it at say 5,000 rupees or something. It will be done. But we have to take it as a national priority.
So there are a few questions. I don't want to go into the specific because they're asking for specific recommendation on comment about classes for the scaling up or testing. So if you can just give some pointers for some of these startups to kind of take their innovation to the next level, that will be very helpful. I've seen 3-4 questions in that you can ask for help in collaboration.
Okay, so once again, I mean, RICH was formed in Hyderabad to do precisely that. But we are a state-paid, state-supported thing. We are still open for supporting others. But let me be very honest. At this stage, we are fighting fires. So if people only have an idea or do not even have proof of concept, it is very, way low on anybody's list of priorities. So unless something is near ready, if it is near ready, come to us. If you're actually, I would say apply to ACT. ACT itself is doing a great job of screening. I know because we also work closely with ACT. We have received more than 1,200 applications, if I'm not mistaken. And, at this rate, I don't know how long they'll keep this open because they have enough to fund. So there are agencies, by the way, BIRAC comes out with new proposal requests. So many government agencies, please go to, I must update our website soon because we also have been a little remiss. But there are so many government initiatives for funding and funding support. If you need, the big challenges, of course, is contacts and connects. And if you need samples, COVID samples, sorry, I don't think any one of us today is in any position to get that for you. Because anyone, nobody is allowed to go near a Kasturbaga hospital or whichever hospital it is, and God knows what those poor people are fighting and whether they are going to have the chance to keep samples, to store them properly, to label them. This is the crisis happening. But yes, as a generic thing, please come to organizations like us. There is in Mohali, in Tri-Cities, there is the Tri-City, this thing also which we help start, which also is another, yeah. So there are state level organizations which are willing to help and support. But if you don't find anyone, please write to me and we'll try and help.
If I could top it up by saying, probably if you're looking at funding, early funding at this stage, and unless you have something which can be delivered here and delivered now, and when I say now, it could be within a span of a few weeks, I would say that this is not the right time. But if you are ready, this is the time. Number two, I believe I'm going to make a very controversial statement, and this is out of my first-hand experience of setting up and leading one of India's largest healthcare innovation program based out of AIIMS and IIT Delhi for nearly more than half a decade. There is easy money available in India, and it is much easier to raise money in India than in Singapore, UK, Western Europe, US put together. I mean, if you are an innovator in India, you do not realize how jealous I am of you with respect to when I was 21. There is no better time to be an innovator than now in India. I don't know if Ajit will agree or disagree with this.
I think for proof of concept, yes, but beyond proof
Yes.
of concept,
Beyond it's difficult.
it's still very difficult, and it's mainly because of the uncertainty about regulation.
Yeah. Yes.
There are a few questions from doctors who feel that they ecosystem. So, and I think, Ajit, I know that you bemoan the fact that the technology and scientists are innovating, but there is a slightly disconnect between the solutions that are being provided and the realities of the clinical world is probably not captured. So, what could be some of the mechanisms in which doctors can get into this world of innovation and discovery, in a sense?
Yeah, and this is the platform that we have to create. Today, what is going to happen is that we are going to do some quick fixing of people who somebody here something, and many techies are innovative enough to talk to some friends who happen to be a doctor, etc., etc. But this is where I'm saying that if I had to redesign Rich now, first thing I would create is that platform for people to connect. I actually happen to have one of our own alums, Sahil Mittal, created Build the World platform, and I need to get back and put it in there where people from different disciplines can connect with specializations and say, hey, I need this, connect me to this. We did not do that. So right now, there are some startups who have doctors on their panels. There are some doctors who have become parts of this thing. But now that there are a large number of doctors who are keen to, we will have to create and build that platform.
All right.
If I can share a good news, is because I have been building that platform for last 10 years, and I think we have systematically deployed it, probably just in a small bubble in Delhi, and now probably a slightly larger bubble in London. And I could say that we have a collaborative platform. It's called, sorry, this is not a marketing pitch, if it appears like that, but it's called the Ahead Alliance. And I'm very happy if you're somebody who is willing to lend insights. as a clinician in the problems that are extremely valuable, because it wastes energy and resources to invent something which is not useful, which is in reality quite often the case, that you invent something and then you have to go back and reinvent it, because when you hit the market with a product that you have made and it doesn't fit the bill. So I don't know what is the best way to do it, but you can write to me and I can channelize you to Africa Alliance, India Alliance, Australia Alliance, Japan Alliance, Europe Alliance, or Americas Alliance, depending on what insight I think will be useful. I'm not promising lightning fast responses, which is one of my banes. I do not respond very, very quickly because of load of information, but I think I'll be able to plug you into with some of these alliances and networks that I've been busy building over the last 10 years.
So actually, as far as telemedicine, yes, helping the startups is one thing. But as far as telemedicine is concerned, very soon, in a matter of days, if not week or so, there is going to be a big announcement, probably on 1st of May, on a big telemedicine initiative, which is supported by a large number. As far as I heard, some 10,000 or 15,000 doctors are already enrolled, large number of hospitals, care. So at least be a part of that ecosystem.
Yes.
I think every one of us is going to be needed. And as the other one, I'll get in touch with you, Prashant, because we would also like to piggyback on that. I don't believe in reinventing the wheel every time. If you have something, we'll share. Thanks.
Great. Talk about creating collaborations. So, so there are a lot of questions about telemedicine, which we will not be taking today. On May 1st, we are having a session exclusively on understanding the telemedicine and how to, drive adoption and, kind of set up telemedicine units. So we will be kind
Soumya, you are breaking. You might want to repeat yourself.
so I'm just I said that there are a lot of questions with regards to telemedicine, and we will not be taking it today. Exclusively about on 1st of May, and then we will answer questions related to telemedicine on Friday, and I will give these questions as inputs to the expert who will be talking on Friday. So that is what I said. So I think we have come to the end of the session. There are a lot more questions. I really hope we could have answered more, but I think we have broadly covered the major themes and queries that have come in. So before I conclude, Ajit, can I request you to kind of summarize and give us like a thing about what to what to expect going forward, especially.
No, I don't want to even attempt. Each one of us, I'm sure, would have picked up some things there. But the only thing I'd say is let's stay positive and let's find opportunities to collaborate. This is the one time, Prashant rightly said, even politicians are to some extent giving up their petty prejudices. So let us, this whole ACT and its thing, all of us are working together. Normally, we all try and get startups to come to our innovation ecosystem rather than somebody else's. And people have just stopped everything and are working together. How can we institutionalize that for the long term? And let us also start thinking about life after COVID. Right now we are firefighting, but we have to relook at our healthcare system. We have to relook at our healthcare delivery systems. How do we ensure? So there are many more questions, and I hope, Sowmya, you and the Max Institute will take a leading role in bringing some of these issues up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ajit, and thank you so much, Prashant. And I'll take a minute to kind of share some of the discussions that we'll be having in the coming week. So last week we had a discussion about telemedicine and where it's going in terms of trends, and we got a lot of queries. So that is why I requested Vikram Tatlu, CEO of Telehealth and at the Apollo Hospitals Group. He is an alumni of the Advanced Management.
You are breaking. You might want to turn off your video and repeat.
Yes, looks like it. If you figure that out. So we are at a point where we are exiting the lockdown, which is going to be a very crucial turning point for all of us. And then hospitals have to get prepared. We have Professor Sarang Leo, Executive Director of the Max Institute of Healthcare Management, who will be talking about the things to be like kind of considered while hospitals do sessions that have been planned as of please to any of our panelists, we will channel it back to them so that they can respond to you. We are also on LinkedIn at Healthcare at ISB. All of our session details are put up there. So please go ahead and then follow us on LinkedIn at Healthcare at ISB and of course Twitter at ISB_healthcare. Thank you so very much, Ajit and Prashant, for your insights, and then hopefully we'll be creating some collaborations out of the two discussions of both of you having on the panel. Most importantly, everybody, please stay safe and stay connected. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all on Friday for the teleconsulting webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.